And here we are live in the spoiler room. It is a new month, folks. We have gone on the lam. And yeah, we were innocent at the time in June, but July, we're murderous. Yes, we're kicking off Murderous Month here in July, where we're looking at films with the word murder in the title. And I've got an interesting lineup, I think, of films for you this month. Hope you enjoyed 5 Mondays in this one. So I had to really get interesting. And things get interesting with today's film from 1997. I figured, now, to preface this, I picked this film only because 4th of July coming up, and given the subject matter, I was like, oh, okay, patriotism, and then we have we're going to try not to get too political, but you have the political environment in the real world today. And suddenly I'm watching this film now and going, okay, this is striking too many familiar beats. And who's familiar beats with me? Well, we have a wonderful crew tonight. Familiar names joining me in this discussion of Murder at 1600, starring Wesley Snipes. We've got Mr. Joe Randazzo back with us. Hello, Joe. How are you doing, sir?
Hey, everyone.
So glad to have you back in the spoiler room. And the man who keeps coming back for more, the man himself, Mr. Ian Simmons. Hello, Ian. How you doing?
I'm doing well.
Good to hear. Good to hear. Going to be interested to hear your folks' opinions tonight on Murder at 1600. So thank you, everyone watching, for venturing down the stairs, pulling up a chair, and popping your favorite drink as we talk movie spoilers. I've got my Mountain Dew Live Wire, hard Mountain Dew Live Wire going on. So my only complaint with the hard Mountain Dew series is that it's no sugar. And I'm like, it's Mountain Dew. How do you replace aspartame with sugar? Sugar with aspartame. How do you do that? How do you replace that with sweet? Just put the sugar. It's already got alcohol. So just put the sugar.
Mark, it looks like you've had enough sugar for one night.
I haven't had enough sugar tonight. So, Murder at 1600. Mr. Joe Randazzo, please, if you wouldn't mind giving us the synopsis of this political thriller.
I'm done. I was going to read it off the box, but the box doesn't have one. It just has the
movie and the
movie and like the who's in the 4 movies in the box set. So one dark night at the White House, a attractive young woman is found dead in the White House bathroom, as somebody puts it, 40 yards from the president. This signals all the Secret Service members to go around and do their checks, including Diane Lane, who opens one of the doors, and the first pet comes at her, or the first pooch comes at her, and she goes, "Okay, all clear here." As this thing unwinds, we find that this woman who was murdered may or may not have had an affair with both the president and his son. That's stated earlier in the movie. It seems that someone is trying to cover up the murder. Are they trying to cover it up to protect the presidency or protect the institutions? And we got our what's the character's name?
The detective.
Well, there's Wesley Snipes' character, and then there's the guy who basically heads the White House. Wesley Snipes asks him how many people were in the White House tonight. He says 31. Spikings, that's it.
Yeah, he's the head of the Secret Service. Yeah,
the head of the Secret Service tells him there were 31 people here tonight, but Diane Lane bringing him the sheet, there's only 30 people on it. So wait a minute, there's a discrepancy already. He puts Dennis Miller on that, and he'll get back to it later. I expected so much more comedy out of Dennis Miller, and I didn't. It wasn't until like the last 20 minutes where he finally plays the sidekick we thought he would. Wesley Snipes starts to try to figure out what's going on. Apparently, this is involving the president's son. He has been dating her. Another woman that Wesley Snipes meets at the club tells him that he's also prone to domestic violence with the women he sleeps with. Oh, wait, no, that's Diane Lane that tells him that. The woman he meets at the club tells him that he bragged about he and his father, the president, having the same mistress, and something about wanting to get laid in every room in the White House. So you get an idea for who the president's son is. I mean, it's just lots of twists and turns. With unfortunately it being a little too predictable, but at one point I thought, oh, I was wrong. It's the opposite of what I thought, but then it turned out to be exactly what I thought. And so Alan Alda is trying to take over, trying to do a hostile takeover of the presidency because they're trying to get some hostages freed, and he feels that it's only going to be done by force. So yeah. And the whole time I'm thinking like, oh, maybe it's not Alan Alda because this guy who looks like the red herring Spikings, he's looking to be kind of the bad guy, and no, it's not. He really is just a red herring. Unfortunately, Alan Alda has a very distinct accent. Like in that scene where he's telling them over the phone what to do, like that's just Alan Alda's voice, like just downgraded. So
this is
don't watch too many movies, people, because they'll ruin movies forever.
It really will.
Murder at 1600. This is one of those interesting one. Wesley Snipes was really hot at this point in 97 because this was just after Blade.
Right before.
Or just before. This was just before, but there was hype for Blade, and then he was here. He had, Demolition Man in here as well. He had this run where he was the guy. With Passenger 57, he was an action star for a while. And that's how I figure he got this role. Apparently, Bruce Willis was also up for this role of the detective, which I just would have loved to see Die Hard at the DC then, DC Die Hard.
Yeah, this is what it would have been anyway, yeah.
It would have been that if they would have got Bruce Willis in here at that point.
You could have slotted in anybody, any of the big action stars of the time into this role, I think, and you probably would have had roughly the same movie.
Probably. Ian, what'd you think of Murder at 1600? Is this your first time viewing it, or did you see it before now?
Yeah, this is my first time watching it today. I thought it was, it was a flashback, even though I'd never seen it. It did remind me of all the 90s movies that kind of came out around that same time. It reminded me that there were so many White House sex scandal movies in the 90s.
What could have brought that on?
Well, but no, here's the rub. I'm talking pre-Clinton.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the Lewinsky scandal broke in 97, the same year that this movie came out. But the affair had started in 95. And Clinton had been known for his dalliances going all the way back to Little Rock. But if you look at, movies like this, you've got Dave, which, came out at the beginning of the Clinton presidency.
I like Dave.
I love Dave. It's a great movie. But I'm saying that was another instance where the president's having sex with a mistress and he has a heart attack and has to be replaced. Right. Overtly. You've got the Eddie Murphy comedy, The Distinguished Gentleman.
Oh my God, I forgot about
Lane Smith plays a senator, I think, and it's the same. There's so many movies that came out in this time period, the 90s, with that same plot, but dealing with it in different ways. Some comedic, some more like action adventure, some political thrillers. But I thought it was good. I wasn't prepared for it. I mean, you guys are talking about, you could put Bruce Willis in here, you could slot any 90s action star in here. I disagree, because if you did that, it would be a completely different movie. Because one thing you notice about this is Wesley Snipes is the headliner, but this is a co-lead with Diane Lane. She gets just as much time snooping around trying to solve things as this, going rogue Secret Service agent who is a former Olympic sharpshooter, which I thought was kind of a cool detail to put in there because she really gets to use those skills. But yeah, it's a team up movie. It's like almost like a riff on the buddy cop thing, because the whole we don't really like each other thing. There's like a minute of that kind of distrust, getting to know you stuff, but then they're just working together. They're a very strong team, and the political intrigue I thought was fun, interesting. Joe, to your point, I really liked that they planted those seeds of this is just another corrupt Washington family. Now, the president's son is a dirtbag, that we have to assume that Diane Lane's character was telling the truth and correct and seeing what she saw when she walked in and saw that he was beating his girlfriend. But we don't that whole thing about having the sharing the mistress with the father, the president, and all that stuff. That's all kind of conjecture and rumor, and we can't tell if that was true. And what we see of the president at the end, here's the biggest twist of all: you've got Ronnie Cox
as a good guy,
RoboCop, Ronnie Cox playing. There's no twist. There's no big reveal like, I did this. I was the mastermind all along. No, he's a good guy. And it freaked me out to see him play someone who's like, what? You're my best friend. We've been in politics for 30 years together. You're trying to stab me in the back. And Alan Alda, TV's Mr. Nice Guy, is like turning into a real heel turn. Like, you should have gotten our boys back. We leave no one behind. I'm like, what am I watching here? But yeah, I thought it's not a great movie, but there are parts of it that are pretty great.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that this also, there was a huge influx of like these political thrillers in the 90s too. Because there was the general's daughter, Wag the Dog,
Enemy of the State,
Executive Decision, like using the presidency,
Air Force One,
using the presidency as like the jumping off point for like an action spy thriller was something that was done a lot. And I can't for the life of me. What, Olympus Has Fallen? Like I can't think of many recently anymore. It seems like a genre. Civil War, yeah.
But so not nearly as many.
Yeah, but it's not as prolific a genre anymore. But I mean, this movie felt very 90s, which was so I mean, we just watched The Fugitive last month, so I shouldn't feel like, but it just feels like this genre is kind of dead, and I kind of enjoyed watching it today, even though this may not be one of the better ones of the genre, but like Ian said, it's still fine, it still works. Not every movie has to change the wheel and completely set the world on fire. This, I think, was just a good, tight political thriller. There were a couple moments where I kind of chuckled a little bit, but other than that, it was really, really engrossing. Like I think the only time I looked at my phone during the entire movie was because somebody called me and I had to put it on silence. So like that's it passes the the phone test. I like to say when I'm in the movie theater, I turn off my phone, but if I have to turn it on and see how much time has passed, you have failed as a filmmaker. But this one, at home I keep my phone on, but I didn't even glance at it. I was actually like taken in by the performances, by the story, because it did have a couple of nice twists and turns, although it did ultimately turn right back into where I thought it would go. But
that's not necessarily a bad thing that it goes, right back where it goes. It kept you engaged, though. This film keeps you engaged because of either the characters, because Wesley Snipes always has had great screen presence. He's just fun to watch in general, regardless of what role he's in. I think he just keeps you engaged quite a bit. But this story, and the characters are interesting. And what's funny is you guys talk about the 90s and watching how they set up these characters. Yeah. I'm like, I miss this in most modern characters, because here we have like the detective who's not just a detective, like a devoted detective who wants to solve the murder in Wesley Snipes' character. You get to his apartment and you find out they do this just little bit of exposition, a little bit setup where he's a history buff. And he's got this huge layout of historical battles that he's recreating with miniatures, and I'm watching this going, wow, I forgot about this part. But at the same time, it just adds just a little bit extra to your character rather than just seeing him constantly doing the police stuff, and there's a few other spots in here too, where you find out something with a character and you're like, oh, that adds something to them. It's not a lot. It's not like they're going all engrossing deep and dedicate a lot of time, but they give you just enough of a window into some of these other characters and what they're doing besides what we see their role is, that I think keeps me also interested. Because
And like Ian mentioned with Diane Lane being a sharpshooter and her getting
Yeah.
to show off those skills,
Right.
Wesley Snipes knows where all the tunnels under the White House are because he's such a huge buff of just the geography of DC that he knows they're there and he knows they can sneak into the White House, which also like, oh my God, hey guys, there's this janitor over there who looks suspiciously exactly like the guy who's suspected of murdering this, be behind all this in the White House. And eventually, one guy notices it in the elevator. The other thing that I noticed with the miniatures is, with him mentioning his refusal to move because he's like, I spent so much time on this, I don't want to move it all. And then when he comes home, first thing I notice is when he comes home, you got the Sean Connery about to get whacked in the Untouchables
Yes.
whacking shot in Wesley Snipes' apartment. So, all right, somebody's in there. Somebody's in there about to jump on him. This is following him around like we followed around Sean Connery in the Untouchables. So that was kind of cool to see. And the miniatures are on the ground, so now we know somebody's in the house because he said he's not going to touch them. He spent so much time on this. Why would they be on the floor? So yeah, I like that it sets up little things like this. I also like the because every cop movie in the 90s has the opening scene where something's going on that has nothing to do with the rest of the movie, but it's there for a reason. It's there to show you that this is a guy who is unorthodox and he's going to do something unorthodox to solve the crime. And that's exactly what Wesley Snipes does with what's the guy's name? It's
the guy
Charlie Rocket.
Yeah, Charlie Rocket. With his whole thing where he's about to kill himself. And it also establishes, oddly, something that I thought he was just bullshitting the guy about his, being kicked out of his building. Apparently that's actually true. That's actually something that's about to happen. I thought he was just bullshitting the guy to get close to him.
That's the running Commerce Commission gag throughout the movie, which is from literally the very opening scene to the very last shot of the movie, last bit of dialogue. It's great. It's consistent.
It's the last line of dialogue entirely. It's let's talk about this. Can I take you out to dinner, Mr. President?
It's weird though in that opening scene because it's Charlie Rocket holding a gun to his head, and he would later go on to kill himself in real life, which is strange. And you got another SNL alum in here, and Dennis Miller, who also played another wacky sidekick to someone uncovering a conspiracy theory in The Net with Sandra Bullock.
Yes,
another 90s government conspiracy thriller. Wow.
Yeah, but what did you think of these characters, Ian? I mean, I don't mean to sound like get off your lawn moment, but I mean just the little things, and especially like with Diane Lane's character, just them mentioning, oh, I used to be an Olympic sharpshooter. That was enough. So when she's out there shooting out lights on a moving helicopter and she's popping guys, you're just like, oh. And then when she does miss later, you're like, how'd she miss? And they don't really address it, but you almost get the idea she doesn't want to actually kill anyone. But they don't like come out and say it, but it's implied. But just that little bit of setup, I'm sorry, but a lot of our films, we don't quite get those little nuggets of things anymore. It's just a basic one beat here type of character.
Well, I was more affected. I mean, it's a cool setup, but I was more affected by her kind of origin story.
Oh yeah.
Which is, in a movie today, she would have made a much bigger deal about the way that she got into her job, which was she was a gold medalist sharpshooter. She got to go to the White House and she met a Secret Service agent and struck up a kind of a rapport. And it was a female Secret Service agent who kind of mentored her and got her into the thing. And that's all you need to know is like, wow, it is a rare thing for there to be a female Secret Service agent. And how do you get more of them? You mentor and you open up the field instead of like, it was just a bunch of men and, I had to fight my way to the top to become a Secret Service. You don't have to hit the audience over the head with it. You have a nice little segue, a nice relatable human story. And that endeared me to her. It kind of called into focus the struggle that she had to go through because it is an uncommon especially back in the early to mid 90s for this to happen. But it was really cool. And as far as Wesley Snipes' character, it was weird to see because my dad used to build those layouts, but he had model trains on them. So to see someone like not have trains running through this, I was like, wow, that's really kind of specific. But our Regis character is a single cop living alone in DC, very good at his job. He's not an alcoholic. You don't hear stories about his, oh, I'm getting divorced, or I've been divorced, or I'm 3 times divorced. And, he's not a bit. My wife is dead. She hasn't been fridged. He's just a guy who's really good at his job. And this is the least Wesley Snipes role that I can think of because he's funny. He's sure of himself, but he's not quite cocky, and he works well with other people. He's just, a cop. And I love that about this. I expected, passenger 57 always bet on black, no, none of that here.
It's interesting because, when you have an actor of Wesley Snipes' caliber who has a bit of comedic range himself, it makes you wonder why they had Dennis Miller at all in the first place, because he just disappears for like an hour of the movie until eventually he calls him on the phone and is like, hey, I need you to meet me at this one spot. And we see that Alan Alda is listening with his boys. Yeah. So, and immediately, actually, I was watching with Sean, who's been on the show with us. We instantly went, okay, Dennis Miller's dead. He's going to die the next scene.
You were waiting for it. You're waiting for it.
And it didn't happen. And it didn't happen. Dialogue at the end that he was still alive.
Yeah.
I did not. This was, he was like full on Dennis Miller in this. That scene at the end where he's distracting the cops, he's literally, you don't hear all of his dialogue, but you can hear him going into the bit.
Yeah.
I'm surprised he didn't say, I don't want to get off on a rant here, guys, but, but was he this Dennis Miller-y in Bordello of Blood? I haven't seen that.
I haven't seen since it came out, but I remember him being very much over the top with the wisecracks in that one. I got to revisit that soon. I revisited Demon Knight a couple of years ago. I got to rewatch Bordello of Blood. The thing that I remember most is 2468. You Can Watch Me Masturbate, which sounds a lot better coming out of Angie Everhart than it does out of me.
Yes.
The only thing I remember about that movie is Dennis Miller's character named Rafe Gutman, which is way up there in the implausible name.
Rafe Guffman. I love that name. I remember that name. And I just happen to have a certain magazine that features Miss Everhart in it when that movie came out, which
I had that one too.
By the way, has an interesting interview with a young Bezos talking about his up and coming company of Amazon. So
that's wild.
It's wild. I was like digging through boxes, and I'm like, all of a sudden I found like, oh shit, I forgot I had this because I was in college back then. I was like, I forgot I had this, and then I saw on the title, it said interview with Jeff Bezos, and I'm like, wait, what? I opened it. I'm like, wow. I'm like reading this interview and him talking about his approach and his philosophy for Amazon and that. And my mind is just like, here we are 20 years some later. And I'm like, my brain is just,
You can look on your Amazon app. I've been an Amazon customer since 1999. So not too long after this movie came out, I was already buying stuff off of Amazon.
There you go.
Thinking back now also, excuse me, the late 90s, Dennis Miller was kind of the it comedian at this point. He was hosting the MTV Movie Awards. He had his show on HBO. He was doing HBO specials. So he was kind of, I guess, probably it was him, and then I guess Chris Rock would be the next one that became big.
Yeah.
But Dennis Miller at this point, I guess, would have been the because he was everywhere.
He was
in the 90s.
He was writing books. It's crazy.
Yeah. And so here he was he was a sidekick to Wesley Snipes, playing mostly straight to, like you said, he distracts until he distracts the cops. He's playing it a little straighter. Wesley actually gets
I thought
more.
It was going to be just. I thought it was just going to be Dennis Miller cracking jokes the whole movie, but it isn't really until that. I feel like that last scene.
No, Wesley Snipes is the one cracking with the humorous approach. As we mentioned that opening scene where he's literally pulls out the paper and goes, "Hey, do you know about this? Can you get my building to a guy who's about to off himself?" And Wesley, you're right, has comedic timing. I think people forget that. And it shows, it just inches out just enough in here to for him to let the audience know that his character realizes how kind of ridiculous some of the situations are, as and they get into the photo with the Photoshop with where they had the negative and the photo, and they talk about, oh yeah, well, the drugstore photo processing, which sidebar quick, folks, back in the day when you used film for photos, you used to take them to places like the pharmacy, and eventually in the late 80s to early 90s they developed the 1 hour photo, where you could, by the way, is a great movie with Robin Williams, but you could take a roll of film to the pharmacy and get it developed. But here they dropped the line of how, oh yeah, they usually crop the photos, and that's where they find a piece of evidence for a special secret service, which leads our guy Regis on this wonderful track to pointing to the president. And this film, you guys mentioned it, and we talked about a number of them, Ian, especially you and I, on this show over the last few years, of Grisham movies.
Yeah.
Grisham movies inspired many of these types of films, like You Got Murder. It's like, this feels so much almost like a Grisham novel in many ways.
There were a lot of those back then too.
Oh yeah, because I mean the 90s were the Grisham decade. I mean, the Firm, that's the only one I can think of right now. But
the
Client, Pelican Brief, a lot of those in the titles,
But I mean, so you had a lot of these spinoffs, and so you combine those with the president angle. I mean, even being president themed adjacent, we were talking about it. Independence Day, was in the mid 90s as well, and that featured prominently a presidential character. It was like,
maybe that's why I said earlier, this movie just felt so 90s to me, because you have, excuse me, an action movie involving the president. You have the Grisham-like storytelling, Dennis Miller all over it. There's a lot of things here that just yell 1990s to you, because
VHS tapes.
VHS for the camera, but they were able to still do a zoom in and enhance as well. I love how you have this. It's like this point in time where things are kind of, you've got both these things existing in the same realm. You have the Photoshop, the photo where they take the negative and they created the photo on the computer, and then they zoomed and enhanced and were able to print that. But then you've got the CCTV footage that's all on VHS tapes that Spikings grabs that has the incriminating evidence.
This is, I guess, a point in time, where the internet was still in its infancy, so you could kind of get away with being like, yeah, I'm sure the government has that technology, we just don't have it yet. It's until the internet comes out that you're like, oh, the government finds out about shit not too long before we do. As far as technology, they'll start using it, but it's not too long before we get it. Like that. Oh, they have special VHS tapes that they could zoom in on. Okay. Fine.
Well, it was hilarious too, because when our two characters, Regis and Agent Chance, when they get the VHS tapes from Spiking's house, who ends up getting assassinated, unfortunately, it's like there's a character who you think was going to go one way, and then he was completely different when he gets to, hey, I'm going to help you guys, and gives the VHS tapes up with the footage, the incriminating footage. They just walk into a store, like a media store, and they shove this tape into a VCR, and they're playing White House CCTV footage on like 8 monitors. And what's even better is you don't get like the shocked patrons all watching the footage or what. Nobody gives a shit what's on the TV.
Well, probably because it's in black and white. As we know, people hate, they just ignore black and white movies.
Well, when we were talking about The Fugitive a couple of weeks ago, we talked about how, like, back then, stuff like this would make the news, like the Escape would make the news. We weren't like all on these all the time and looking and going, wait a second, isn't that like, it isn't until like you see them side by side on the news in the store that suddenly people pick up on who they are. And I think that's probably part of it. You know, we weren't like just completely inundated by the news at all times back then.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think had that scene taken place today, sorry, you'd have like two people off in the corner looking at their phones going, oh, right there is that you know, you'd have that.
Oh yeah, that would have been a cutaway to them doing exactly what you did. Yeah.
Everybody's suddenly pulling out their phones and taking pictures of Regis and Chance, but you get Regis and Chance's face show up on TV and they're like, oh shit, they kind of cover it, walk out, and people are like, wait, are they or aren't they? But by that time, they've both exited the store. And so if you think about timeline, even, okay, so they exit the store, someone calls, hey, I just saw Agent Chance and you know, the two people on TV. If they call the cops, by the time the cops get there, Regis and Chance are like gone. Like
assuming their car didn't get towed from that terrible illegal parking job.
Well, yeah, there is that.
A very inconspicuous way.
A very inconspicuous
Pull up
way.
on the sidewalk, leave it there, crooked, blocking an alley, let's run in. No one will notice.
One of the things I was reading up on, and I'm glad they didn't, because you could see they were leaning towards it in this story, but I think they edited it enough to where you don't get it. Apparently, there were going to be love scenes between Aegis and Chance. And yeah, Regis and Chance, excuse me. And I'm glad they didn't have that, because I liked the dynamic between these two characters enough to where I was like, please don't go romance. Please don't show please. You know, he shows up at her apartment and she's just in her long, you know, extended long shirt only, that that 90s type of, oh, hey, you know, this is how ladies lounge around in their house. Which in just a button down shirt that goes down below just to their mid thigh. And I'm like,
right before you said button down shirt, I was thinking, yeah, it's going to be a button down shirt. Cut off right here. You're just 2 inches away from the promised land. Yeah.
When she sits down, yeah.
But we've probably also seen Diane Lane in like 100 movies where she's done that too.
Yeah.
So there's that.
But I was very happy they cut that out of this film, because I like the film as it is, in all honesty. I didn't need them to be romantically involved, though again, that was a very common trope. Whenever you had the male-female partner, it was eventually going to lead to a kiss at the end, if nothing else.
Yeah,
well, that's
I immediately
that's how you get people, Mark. That's how you get people.
Yeah, but you don't need it to be.
That's what was going to happen. I was like, oh, okay, so Diane Lane and Wesley Snipes are going to fall in love, and yeah, thankfully they didn't. They subverted me on that.
Right, but there was I guess to that point is there is nothing. A love scene in this movie would have felt gratuitous and out of place, whereas in a lot of the movies, I think that you're kind of alluding to, Mark, it doesn't, because it's written that these characters are going to develop an interest in each other. In this one, is completely kind of platonic, and yeah, I mean, she's in her, you know, Diane Lane, you know, intimate wear or whatever, but it didn't cross my mind that he was going to, you know, open up a beer in the fridge and they're going to get down to business or something. Yeah, no.
Well, no, yeah. But I mean, usually in some other films, especially around this time, when a character would show up like that, it would spark the start of something. And I'm glad they didn't have that in here. Not because I don't think it has a place. It's just within this movie.
Yes, this movie, no. Does not
absolutely
work.
No reason for these two to have any type of romantical thing going on between them.
Also, there's already so much going on in this movie. The last thing you needed was another subplot, because this thing's going in like 45 different directions. So yeah.
Well, on top of that probably would have opened the door for her character being kidnapped or fridged or something like that. You know, the horrible cliche. But I mean, just talking about the difference between the 90s and today, I wish that more movies today had that, you know, that brought back romance, sexual attraction, sex scenes. I'll say it, because we've gone in the complete opposite direction, where like there's just nothing. Like you've got a man, a woman, they go through hell together, and you know they walk away with a handshake. I'm like, what the fuck is this nonsense?
I was talking to someone at my job a while back when the trailers came out for Miller's Girl. Because everyone's like, oh, did you see there's going to be an erotic thriller with Jenna Ortega? And everyone's like super excited about it. And one of the people that I worked with was like, just because I think, movies are just kind of sexless now. And it's been kind of an issue. And that's why you've kind of been seeing Adrian Lyne went back and did an erotic thriller. Paul Verhoeven's doing one. Last week after we went off the air, we talked about Emmanuel coming back, and it's going to be Naomi Watts. So it feels like that stuff's been kind of missing from movies, and now it's going to come back into movies. Because I think they realize the younger generation doesn't give a shit about movies. Which is sad. I'm really, really sad to think that. But yeah, I think they're just movies have been catered now for like the last decade and a half. It's been like the PG audience for everything. It's like that's what they were going for every movie.
PG-13 or PG.
Yeah, like it's like, hey, us grown-ups want movies too.
Well, and in this one too, I mean, this one showed you can have some of that, and it's handled in such a way to where it showed the situation in the beginning, because we open up with a little bit of nudity. We see the sex scene with the eventual victim of the murder at the very beginning. It opens up, and that's about the only nudity you get. But it gave you it's like it added a little extra level so that when you see her dead, you're like, oh crap, because we just saw her being intimate before, and we saw more of her than maybe some expected. And you've got that kind of gaze, and all of a sudden now she's dead. And so now you're just like, oh, and it gives you that kind of,
or maybe let's secure the R rating for this.
Yeah, let's secure the R rating.
Because this probably, like, if outside of that scene, like this probably could have been a PG-13 movie outside of that scene, because the violence isn't really that explicit or gory or anything. I mean, a 13-year-old ain't gonna get as much out of this as an adult would. But
speaking of Adrian Lyne, I mean, he did a few years after this Unfaithful with Diane Lane, and wow. But that's the thing about like this movie also. I mean, I love Diane Lane. I think she's a pretty terrific actress, and I also have had a crush on her since The Outsiders. But
go way back.
Right, but I mean, Dwight Little, Halloween 4's Dwight Little gave us this movie, and he knows how to shoot women to make them the most, like, I'll just say cute, attractive, not like hot, but there's a lot of great kind of hero shots of Diane Lane in this movie where you're just like, I would love to date this woman. It's not like I'm objectifying her or anything like that. It's not an objectifying lens, but just, and kind of the same way with Wesley Snipes, and damn it, I'll even say it weirdly, Dennis Miller. Like I don't think they've ever looked better than they have in this movie, except maybe Wesley Snipes in parts of Blade.
Pretty much everybody in this film, actually, the way they shoot him and everything.
Except for Spikings, you cannot make Daniel Denzel look.
Well, that's true. That's true. But everybody else in here, I mean, it's actually, it's one of those things where you get this whole visual a palette of people who it makes all of them look good. Nothing, you don't have your grungy guy either. That's what's interesting is here is this kind of crime political thriller, yet you don't have them going to the alley where the one guy with the 8 o'clock shadow and flies buzzing around him, cigarette from his lip, all of his clothes are dirty or whatever, the informant or whatever. This story doesn't take you into an underworld for them to try to figure things out or get connections. Everything is more in the Crystal Palace world, if you will, where she's getting the evidence and where, and Diane Lane's character is awesome in this. And I loved her scene. She gets to have her moment for sure in this film, a big moment with Spikings. When she's first called into Spiking's office at the very beginning, when she's working with Regis, and he tries to kind of intimidate her a bit, and she turns it around. And I just loved how she turned it around the minute she realized what he was trying to do. Because she's like, should we be in the office with the door closed? And, he's kind of like, wait, what? And she's like, I really liked that moment with her character, because you could tell this was the way she figured out how she could get out of this situation without like getting angry or yelling or anything. She's just like, well, the door's closed. And
Well, she couldn't. I mean, she couldn't do that because
No.
she had evidence, like
Right.
bulky evidence stuffed
Evidence
into
in
her
her
shirt,
yeah.
and so that was her way out. And you're right; it was a very clever bit of dialogue, and he's got his hands on her shoulders, almost like treating her like you could imagine if that was like a male agent, like the big boss coming in, like kind of setting his
Yeah.
hands on his shoulders and stuff. But it's different because of the difference in the sexes, that weird dynamic there. So yeah, it was very clever. It's like, why is the door open? And he's taken about like, wait, what? Oh shit, this is okay. Yeah,
And he's a
Great
great red herring, because like there were points where I really believed he could be the actual murderer.
Yeah, like he was in cahoots with whoever the political guys, and you think he might be the murderer because it would make most sense because he works most closely with all of the guys that were involved in trying to overthrow the president, so to speak. So, and he didn't seem to have the best opinion of the president either. So yeah, Spikings is that great turn when you get to show up when Regis shows up at his house. And he's like, you've got me pegged all wrong. Like, he's not just telling the detective, he's telling the audience. He's like, yeah, you guys got me pegged all wrong. And I love that turn as well. And again, it's not like breaking the mold, but it keeps things interesting with these characters. You're just like, oh, if he's actually this, then what about these other characters? Are they actually something else that we haven't seen yet? It puts that question in there to keep you at least interested in where this is going to go. Yeah,
I mean, it is weird to think because as we were talking about this earlier, like erotic political thrillers and political comedies and political action movies were kind of the comic book movies of the 1990s.
Yeah,
they were just everywhere, and it's strange to think that we were awash in. I mean, even the dumbest one of these movies is smarter than the dumbest comic book movie. I mean, it really like, you're gonna have a movie about politics and the law, and you're gonna learn something while you're watching people get shot and blowing up cars in order to distract helicopters, which was a great movie. I want to talk briefly about the weird experience, and this is, I think, only just me, but watching Tate Donovan playing the president's son. He's 10 years away from having been in space camp, where he was playing a high school student, I think, who was on they go to space camp and they go to space. Then he does this movie where he's playing like a probably 22, 23-year-old law student, abusive law student. And within 6 years, he's playing the father of a teenager on the OC. I don't know what's going on with this guy, but it works. He just works in all these roles.
I mean, although the scene where they show him in the college, you go down the row of teenagers and the notes getting passed, and it's like, oh, who's the old dude? And he's clearly like a decade older than everybody there.
Yeah.
Oh,
well, and there was another person who was just in a very long button-down shirt. A lot of the ladies here apparently casually wear just really long button-down shirts. When he goes to his girlfriend's to throw off the Secret Service to go meet Regis, and he's like, "Yeah, Regis, nah, I didn't kill her." He's like, "Nah," he's like, "Yeah, I just, I like having sex, but I wasn't gonna kill her," But it was just, and then you get the whole other subplot of why they want to overthrow the president. There's this underlying subplot with soldiers that are being held in Korea, and like all the people around the president want the president to go invade Korea to rescue these guys, and the president's trying to approach it diplomatically. And you get at one point the general showing up and questioning the president, and the president goes, "Yeah, I'm going to expect your resignation in the morning on my desk." He's like, "With pleasure." You get this Korean subplot, which kind of has a connection to what's going on, sort of. I mean, it motivates
the reason that they're trying to overthrow him,
right?
So yeah. It's just that it's only like 5 minutes of the movie. They really don't spend a lot of time on it.
No, I mean I gotta disagree.
don't have
That subplot is all over this movie. Like there are constant news reports about it.
Yeah.
There are protests on the White House lawn. It keeps coming up in like all the meetings that the president has are about either the sex scandal or the North Korean thing.
Right.
So it comes to a head at the end, and you're like, oh, that's
Right.
what this was all about. But I mean, as a thread, it's the heart of the film, which is it's just strange to think because you're thinking about the mid to late 90s and North Korea, and like, well, I guess, but
You look at it now, it kind of has some relevance. I mean, you look at some of the stuff going on as far as the political subplot in this film, and I'm watching this going, this all feels fairly familiar.
Also, just shows
Yeah.
how little shit has changed in 30 years.
Yeah, there's that too. But I'm intrigued by this movie. And again, like you guys said too, though, if you're a young, maybe teenage, your early teen or whatnot, and you're not familiar at all the origins of why Alan Alda is popular, maybe his casting is okay. But for me, it was really weird just seeing Ronnie Cox and Alan Alda in opposite turns, the face and the heel, because Ronnie Cox was all, I mean, it's like, yeah, it was like Atherton. If he's there, he's the prick. And
I wouldn't be surprised if that was deliberate, knowing the audience's expectation and setting them up for, well, I'm waiting for the turn, and the turn is that there's no turn, that he's actually playing against type.
Yeah, because it did. I went back and forth, like Ian. This was a first time watch for me today, so I just kept going back and forth with. So wait, is the president like actually kind of a scumbag, or is it like does he know nothing about what was going on? And turns out at the end, oh yeah, shit, okay, he didn't. But yeah, this movie, for imperfections being what they are, it kept me the entire time just kind of riveted. So
yeah, I mean,
the one,
go ahead.
I was gonna say the one, it's not exactly a plot hole, but it's something that I would like to have had expanded on. It's once we find out that Kyle, the son, is a womanizer and a woman beater, it kind of lends credence to the idea of, well, maybe there's something wrong with Dad. But at the end, we find out that Dad is a good guy, and he's very much sort of a pacifist. It's also kind of like the weird code switching where, and this happened in Dave as well. Like I said, that was a Clinton era movie, but it was actually filmed at the end of the Bush administration, where you've got a president who looks very much like George Bush. And you've got that here with Ronnie Cox, even though this was well into Clinton's second term. But you've got this weird kind of expectation that there's something crooked about this president. At the end of the film, it would have been nice for Diane Lane or Wesley Snipes to say, oh, by the way, Mr. President, I know you're going to help me with this zoning problem or whatever the hell's going on, but you should probably look into your son, because apparently this guy has no idea that he's raised this monster. So I'm like, where does that come from? Is it him? Is it the wife? Because we don't really get to see the president's wife except in like a couple of brief scenes where she's kissing him on the cheek or whatever.
Yeah, played by Diane Baker. Kitty Neal is her name. And it's funny because the way she almost plays the role, it made me wonder if she knew how her son was. And they don't play at that angle, and maybe it's on the cutting room floor, but when we see the only few scenes we see of the first lady, they're at the banquet and she's up at the podium talking, and you just see her demeanor and everything, and it's almost like she, there's some story there. The way she plays it, we don't really get it, but just Diane Baker's performance, like her mannerisms, everything, you're like, that's a troubled first lady right there. For more than just the murder happening, you get the feeling there's more there.
Well, right, I mean, we know that he. Oh, go ahead, Ian.
Well, I was just going to say it, but that's the one bit of, I'll call it sloppiness, because it just underscores they threw Kyle in as a red herring.
Right.
Right. So there's no closure to that. Again, there's no like, hey, Mr. President, by the way, you should look into what's going on with your son because he's an abusive prick. Or, the dad saying like, I got to go talk to my son or something. It's just that. And Kyle never comes back. Like,
No.
Regis confronts him at the, at kind of having him meet at this rendezvous, shakes him down. Kyle's like, I didn't kill anybody and all this stuff is a lie and all that stuff. But then he kind of disappears. Regis figures out everything else kind of on his own, but it's just a dangling thread. And for me, that's he's the bit of audience manipulation. He's the obvious red herring, but there's no, like, he's still out there as a person floating around in this universe, but he's still a monster.
Yeah. And I always wondered, was the Mr. President actually clueless about his son, or just was one of those two where he didn't want to admit it, but knew how his son was? You're right. The son is the dangling participle, so to speak. He's the one that, was the most obvious red herring.
I got that vibe from, the first lady that, that's
right.
why she's kind of uneasy is my son might have done this.
Yeah. And
right. But I guess the thing is, at the end of the film, we're so relieved that the plot has been avoided.
Yeah.
We're not going to go to World War III. The president turns out is a good guy, but ... not everybody in his family is,
right.
Kind of a good guy. There's one little
bit we're relieved that the wife beater, or girlfriend beater, domestic abuser, whatever you want to call it, we're relieved that he didn't get railroaded.
Right.
It's a weird position it puts you in, but at the same time, I think that's kind of the appeal for me for this film. This is like my,
Did he got away with it?
No.
I'm just doing the same thing. It was like, wait, you're glad the wife beater got away with it?
No. Let me specify. I am not happy that the wife beater got away. What I'm saying is the film does give you a few unexpected turns for the type of movie it does, to where it bucks your expectations. That's what I mean. I'm not approving of the character at all. No, by any means. No.
For a second there, I was thinking like the end of Some Like It Hot with Jack Lemmon and Joey Brown, where it's like, nobody's perfect.
It's at the end of it, it's an interesting film. I think it's fun. While it is buried within the other political films, I had fun watching it again. I haven't watched it in a while, but watching it, I'm sitting there and it's one of those movies where I'm like, I'm enjoying it. This is a fun film. I forgot how much I had actually enjoyed this film. And I remember the trailers. The trailers had footage that was not in the movie, like Regis showing up in a helicopter. And he shows up with a helicopter on the White House lawn. And actually in the teaser trailer, they would have him land. And I was using this in the quotes as I was building up to our show tonight. There was a line to where he gets dropped in a helicopter, and he walks up to a phone booth. Yes, there used to be phone booths back in the day, folks. And he calls it. He goes, he's like, there's a homicide at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. The address, it changes all the rules. And then you go, murder at 1600. It was a great teaser. I remember that teaser distinctly, and I just loved that bit of the trailer. It's not in the film, it's just like either they shot it for the trailer or it's a cutout bit, because it looks like they did cut out a good chunk of this film, landing at the sweet spot of a little over 100 minutes. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I was fine with that for this movie. This movie felt right at that time. It didn't feel like there were scenes added to stretch it to that time.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
There are two details towards the end when they're going through the sewers, or the underground catacombs beneath the White House, that I thought was great. We mentioned, Mark, that there wasn't like the disgusting kind of like informant guy in the alley. The lowest this movie gets is assassins in blue jeans. I thought that was kind of a nice touch.
Isn't
I don't
that
know
a
what's
song
going on there.
Isn't that a
It
song?
should be. No, that'll be a country western band.
It could also be a movie.
It could be a movie
Yeah.
too.
Assassins and Blue Jeans.
There you go.
But the other thing is, I don't think I've seen this in another movie. If you guys have, let me know. But you've got the red beams of the motion sensor. Sometimes they're lasers that'll cut you to pieces, but oftentimes they're motion sensors. And it's always like, how do we turn these off? How do we Catherine Zeta-Jones our way through these lasers so we don't trip the alarm? But they're like, no, we're just going to go through it. And you got 10 seconds. And Wesley Snipes just walked right through it.
It was so great. I ain't doing any of that shit.
Yeah, I loved that bit. They were looking at it. Okay, well, what's the response? They were going through all the stats, and I'm like, and then she just looks at him and was like, "I'll hold them off as long as I can." I'm like, "Oh, they're just gonna break the beam and just go." I'm like, none of this, do this dance or this mirror thing or whatnot. No, they're just gonna go. She's gonna be sacrificial so he can get to the president.
Right, it's such a small thing, but I don't think I've seen that before. All the other movies try and get around it, but these are.
Well, even the whole thing about trying to get around it, I think that started, with entrapment, didn't it? Because I can't remember a movie doing it before that even. I mean, I could be wrong on that, but
entrapment was one of those. Another one. I mean, Hudson Hawk got around the laser tripping.
That's true. Hudson Hawk did. Yeah,
Hudson Hawk did. Olive Oil with the. God, I love that movie. I love that movie so hard. I don't care. I adore that movie, even if Bruce Willis didn't ever want to talk about it. But
I didn't want to talk about it because it bombed the box office. Because I watched it like 2 years ago. Like, I don't get why everybody hates this. This is not that bad. It's totally offbeat, but
I've never seen Hudson Hawk. I gotta fix that. Yeah.
Sandra Bernhard and Richard
Grant.
Richard E. Grant completely steal the movie.
Just off the rails and in another dimension. Those two.
Yeah. I think it was just too weird for the time it came out.
Oh yeah. Well, the thing is with that. Sorry, Ian, I didn't mean to cut you off. We could get to you. I just want to finish this thought. Is that I think the problem with Hudson Hawk was Bruce Willis up to that point was starting to do actioneers, like serious actioneers, and people forgot he was a comedian. So when he went and basically did a comic book film to where it had a lot of comedic and outrageous things, I don't think the audience was used to that because a lot of people were introduced to Bruce Willis not by Moonlighting, but by Die Hard. So here's this action star. They go into Hudson Hawk. Oh, he's playing a thief. Look at the trailer. They go in, and it's just this quirky Looney Tunes, bizarre as hell story. And I think that turned people completely off to it.
And he's singing and dancing in it.
And he's singing and dancing in it. But we don't want to ruin it for you too much. Sorry. Go ahead, Ian.
I think you just did. I don't. No. It's kind of like, what was that Clive Owen movie from years ago where he was doing the Bugs Bunny thing with the carrots?
Oh, Shoot 'em Up with Paul Giamatti.
Yeah, Shoot 'em Up.
Yeah, I fucking hated that movie. Everyone's like, you gotta see it, it's so amazing and offbeat. I'm like, yeah, it's the comedian who tells you how dangerous and edgy he is without actually saying anything funny. Fucking awful. Anyway, no, I was just gonna say, I think you take Hudson Hawk and you combine it with meme culture, and you have Hudson Hawk Tua. That's for the kids. Yeah.
Spit on that thing.
Woo!
Hey, well, there was no.
You can see the poster now, can't you, Mark?
I can. I'm seeing the poster right now. Thank you. You know how my imagination works. It doesn't help me any. Thank you.
Yeah, somebody sent me a photo today of somebody got traded from the Atlanta Hawks to the New Orleans Pelicans, and it said from a hawk to a pelican, and then off to the side was that girl just kind of looking at it and smiling, and I'm like, oh, all right. He said hawk to a pelican.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And now that we've gone completely off the rails, to bring it back, I've got a little bit of trivia. I got a little bit of trivia before we close it out here, because I think this makes this film even more fascinating of what it could have been. If you'll bear with me, folks, a bit. But Wesley Snipes was originally going to do another film instead of this one. In December of 95, Warner Brothers signed a $10 million contract with Snipes to star in one of their upcoming films, an action-adventure thriller titled Sandblast. It was based on a 93 spec script by Stephen Maeda, which he sold to them and producer Joel Silver for $750,000. Eddie Murphy was originally going to star in the film, but he quit due to scheduling conflicts. Sandblast was going to be about a former specialist and landmine expert who joins the U.S. commando team to track down lost nuclear warheads, which are lost somewhere in the desert of post-war Iraq. Besides the dangers of desert wasteland, his team would have to fight against the team of evil Green Berets who are also looking for the warheads and would all have to deal with a huge sandstorm, which would make their search more difficult. Jean-Claude Van Damme was going to play the villain of the leader of the evil Green Berets. I want to see this movie.
That never came out, huh? Man, $750,000 for the screenplay, and then they did nothing with it.
Yeah, although the pre-production on Sandblast was almost over, the production was going to start. Warner Brothers canceled the film due to concerns about box office potential of Snipes and Van Damme and some other problems.
Wow.
But I want to see Sandblast.
I just want to read the script because Joe, you're right in your incredulity. I mean, especially in the early to mid 90s. I mean, that's some serious freaking cash.
Yeah, that's a lot of money for that time period for one screenplay. That's got to be close to a record for that time period. For someone who wasn't already like a greatly established writer, I mean.
Yeah.
Well, and the fact that that would have been written in 95 and they were looking for lost warheads. I'm like, that a little before its time? Or was that around?
I mean, it would have been a post-Iraq War, pre-Iraq War movie at the same time.
That's a little weird. But let's take a look because we've got an opportunity to do it as another segment here on the Spoiler Room. We're doing this almost every time. 1993, we looked at $750,000. What does that equal to today's standard? Let's take a look quick. What does the intranet say? Let's see. The value, here we are. The value of $750,000 in 1993 is equivalent in purchasing power to $1.6 million today. So they bought a $1.6 million possible script and did nothing with it.
$1.6 million in 19, even now you could make a decent low budget indie on that.
Yeah. So $750,000 in 93 was 1.6 million in today's dollars, the equivalent.
Or you can buy a nice house and a sports car because Dennis Miller, when they're in the apartment and they find the magazine with the photomat receipt in it, he kind of gets out of it by saying, 1.2 on the beach. He's talking about real estate.
Yeah, which, if you think of inflation, the 750,000 went to 1.6 million. So yeah, 1.2 on the beach. That's some cha-ching right there.
Mm-hmm.
You could have put a nice down payment on that house for $750K.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could. And we have a viewer who's asking if they could ask a question. Vengeance CNS. Yeah, go ahead. What's your question? We're gonna wrap it up here shortly, but you could give us your question. But yeah, that money. I always love doing these. Okay, is Ian single? He's really cute. Sorry to disappoint you, Vengeance CNS. But Ian is rather married.
20 years.
20 years. Yes.
Yes. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
But hey, you never know. That's what you get in the Spoiler Room, folks. Ian's podcast, you get questions from Penny and them like, hey, about the film. Here, it's like the dating game. But in any case, thank you for tuning in, Vengeance CNS. We appreciate your comment for sure. And yeah, thank you everybody for tuning in. We're going to wrap it up here. Final thoughts. Joe, we'll go with you first. Would you recommend someone checking out Murder at 1600?
Yeah, I would say check it out. I enjoyed it. It's one of those movies that you never really hear about anymore. So I was like, okay, maybe there's a reason for that. But then when I watch it, I'm like, okay, maybe it doesn't like stand out greatly, but it was, and maybe it is a little by the numbers, but by the numbers back then was still very, very good. So yeah, I would say check it out. If you're in the mood for a good type political thriller, definitely.
Ian, what about you? What's your final thought with this?
Same page. I was surprised to watch it. I mean, not all of it was crazy engaging. I mean, there are some stretches where it's just like, yeah, this is the typical political thriller business. But yeah, for all the reasons we've talked about tonight, and probably more, it's just different enough from the sea of other movies that came out around the time, which I don't know how this thing did. Do we know how it performed? Because my recollection of it was just like, yeah, it's another Wesley Snipes movie.
It didn't do too well at the box office, if I remember correctly. I mean, it did okay, but
maybe it's because it wasn't the usual wisecracking every 10 seconds Wesley Snipes. Maybe that's what people wanted.
Or it could just be that it looked like everything else and people like, yeah, I've seen it, but unfortunately, because we see that today with some movies. I didn't care for Furiosa, but I think a lot of people are like, I just saw Fury Road and it looks like more of the same, so I'll wait till it's on video or something. Well,
it grossed $25 million worldwide. It had a good opening. It's almost 8 million in opening.
Okay.
But let me see what the budget was real quick. If we can get that, maybe. Let's see. If I learn how to type.
For 1997, the budget was probably.
It was.
One.
Let's see.
It was a fairly decent budget, so it's probably 10 to 15 million.
It was. Let's see. It grossed 25. The picture. They figure the picture likely cost between $40 and $50 million.
That was way off.
And half of that was probably the CNN licensing deal, because you notice every time they had a news report, it was always CNN.
Although this is a Warner movie, so were they merged at that point? No, they weren't merged yet.
No, Ebert panned the movie quite a bit. The Wesley Snipes was commanding about $10 million in salary for his vehicles. So that alone.
So Snipes alone was what I projected the budget to be.
Right. So he was they figure he was probably close to 10 million alone at that point. But he was in a lot of thrillers then, and a number of them tanked. And actually, I remember soon after that, he wasn't in as many films after this. I mean, you had Blade coming out, but if you look at production time versus, after the film is released, after this, he did kind of not get as many roles as he used to at the tail end of the 90s there. But luckily, he had the Blade trilogy to help him out.
I thought he was more of an action star more than like a thriller star, though.
He was, but they said he had a cold streak with a series of flops: Drop Zone, Money Train, The Fan, and then Murder at 1600. But then he was in the Fugitive sequel with the Marshals.
Yeah, U.S. Marshals. It's actually
the U.S. Marshals. Yeah. So, and then he had the Blade franchise. So he kind of swooped back up, but he did. This was Murder at 1600 was when he was box office slumping a bit. His films were, so maybe that's it. It's hard to say, but yeah, I'm with all of you. I think Murder at 1600, if you're a fan of anyone in this film that we mentioned tonight, especially Wesley Snipes, I think it's worth seeing. His character is just different enough from your normal detective, 80s and 90s detective, to keep you interested. And there's really I mean, we mentioned the VCRs and that, but even still with that, people still use them today for their security camera footage. There's not a huge amount that dates this film, in all honesty, too much. A few bits in here and there of tech, but for the most part, there's not a whole lot that dates this movie. So it even holds up today, just in general, watching it. So I would recommend it as well. So there you have it, folks. Murder at 1600, our first Murderous episode of July. We've got 4 more coming because there's 5 Mondays in this month, but I've got it all mapped out. But right now is my chance to give my wonderful, talented, patient crew members the license to shill. So shill away. Ian, you're first tonight. What do you got to shill?
Well, thanks. I'm Ian Simmons. I run Kicking the Seat, which you can find at kickseat.com. I'm also on YouTube, which you can find just by searching Kicking the Seat on YouTube. And we do interviews and reviews and live streams. And this Wednesday night, we'll be, I guess, pre-celebrating July 4th with a look at A Quiet Place, Day 1. I don't know how those things connect at all, but maybe we'll find some way to make it work. But 8 p.m. Central. And I'm here every Monday night talking movies with Mark and Joe lately. I love this triumvirate we have going on. It's great. Oh, and by the way, Vengeance CNS, I see the last comment there. It's not just a ring, it's a promise.
Yeah, there you go. And Joe, go ahead, sir. Your license to shill is yours.
I've enjoyed being back here too. This has been great. I'm kind of looking forward to a lot of these. I'm on the Literary License podcast. This upcoming month, we will be covering Spirited Away, Kiki's Delivery Service. That'll be next week. The following week, we're going to be covering the 1945. I think this might be the last of the anthology horror. Oh no, we got one more month of anthology horror films. We're going to be going with Dead of Night from 1945, considered one of the greatest horror anthology movies ever made. And we're pairing that for some reason with the 1961 Kurt Siodmak and Herbert Strock film, The Devil's Messenger, starring Lon Chaney Jr., which was a compilation of episodes of 13 Demon Street, and it's one of the worst one of the worst horror anthology movies ever made. So yeah, we'll be doing those. This coming Friday night is an episode of The Last Drive-In that I did the pre-screening for. It's Joe Bob's summer school, and the theme this week will be medical school. Ooh. So the film they're showing will be a horror film with medical themes to it, and it's a good one. It's a classic 90s slasher. So yeah, that's it for what I'm shilling right now.
Exciting. And folks, I am horrible at this still, but that's just because I am getting used to the fact that we are now partner status, which means you can do super chats if you want to help us out at all. I'm still learning how to do all that. I'm not at the top tier yet of partner, but we're getting there. We're midway. We're at that midway tier. So we could do super chats, super stickers, and some other things as well. I'm still trying to wrap my head all around it, but that's because of you folks. You find folks tonight who are tuning into the live show and those who watch us archived afterwards or listen to the podcast. Thank you so much. We're Murderous month here in July. Films with the word murder in them. So next week is Murders at the Zoo. After that, we've got Murder by Death. After that, we've got Murders at the Rue Morgue. And then we end it with Blue Murder at St. Trinina's, which Trinians. Thank you. I still missed. I am horrible at pronouncing names. Let me tell you, that made recording my review of A Quiet Place Day 1 interesting. I had to do a lot of practice, so I made sure I pronounced names correctly with that because I wanted to get the name pronunciation right. That's live now too, folks. And yeah, thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. We appreciate every single one of you. And now we'll just say good night, everyone.
Good night.